Shavua Tov, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome to Tillis Tell Stories for Saturday night. The title of this week's video is Beginner's Luck. I translated and adapted the story many years ago from the Hebrew weekly Sikat HaShavua. Subsequently, I included it in my first book, Saturday Night Full Moon, the ideal time for telling stories. Less than a week after the tzaddik Rabbi Levi Yitzchak moved to Berdichev in 1785 to serve as the chief rabbi there, 3 men knocked on his door to ask him to decide a question of Jewish law between them. It would be his very first case as a rabbinical judge in his new position. A wealthy merchant from the nearby town of Hemelnik, had brought several barrels filled with honey to sell at the big fair in Berdichev. Unfortunately, just then, the price of honey drops sharply. Not wanting to suffer a loss on his investment, he asked a business acquaintance, to store the honey for him until the price rose again. The two were old friends, and the local man was happy to oblige, the man in Berdichev. Knowing each other to be completely honest, they didn't write down anything of their arrangement or call in witnesses. Time went by, the price of honey remained low, so the barrels remained in the Berdichev cellar, untouched and unnoticed. More time went by. The man on whose property the honey was stored contracted a fatal disease and passed away. Everything happened so quickly. He never had a chance to explain to his family anything about the state of his affairs. More time passed. The price of honey finally began to slowly climb. When the increase became significant, the owner of the barrels showed up at his deceased friend's house and claimed his honey from the sons who had inherited and taken over their father's business. However, they, having heard nothing about it from their father, refused to honor the Hemelnik merchant's claim. They said, what do we know? We don't know anything about it. Anybody can come to us and say they have a claim on things we don't know about. After some discussion, they decided to proceed to the Beit Din, the Rabbinical Court, to present the case before the new rabbi. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev is one of the most popular rabbis in Hasidic history. He was a close disciple of the second leader of the Hasidic movement, Rabbi Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mezrich. He is best known for his love for every Jew and his perpetual intercession before heaven on their behalf. He went to his heavenly reward on the 25th of Tishrei, 1810. Many of his teachings are contained in the posthumously published Kedushat Levi. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak listened to the litigants carefully, even though the law in such a case was clear. Of course, he would have to rule against the out-of-town merchant. Even if there had been witnesses or a signed document, Torah stipulates, which there wasn't, even if there was some level of proof like witnesses or a signed document, and nevertheless Torah law stipulates, especially in the claims against orphans, that is, heirs who are disadvantaged by the fact that they have no way of knowing what transpired between the deceased and the litigant. The claim cannot be collected without first swearing an oath as to the validity of one's claim, and in addition to the document of witnesses. And here there were neither document nor witnesses. Nevertheless, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak hesitated, pronounced the obvious verdict, and finalized the case. 2 nagging thoughts disturbed him. Why, in his first days in his new position, did the Almighty arrange for his inaugural judgment to be something so straightforward and clear-cut, with no room left to budge left or right to attempt any sort of compromise? Could it be a hint from heaven that his practice to always pursue accommodation and compromise was not correct? That only adhering strictly to the letter of the law can be considered the way of truth? The other thought that made him uncomfortable, perhaps even more than the first, was, why did the supernal judge arrange it so that his very first ruling in the town would be considered bizarre by the entire populace? After all, the merchant from Hemelnik was well known to everyone in town as a scrupulously honest man, as someone who was already wealthy and immune to monetary pressure, and as far from theft as east is from west. Not only that, furthermore, everyone knew that the merchant and the deceased were old friends who trusted each other implicitly and never resorted to documents or witnesses in their transactions. So Surely the entire town would be paying attention to the first ruling handed down by the new rabbi. Everyone was sure to wonder, why should the law of the Torah be so opposite to common sense? Everybody knew that the Homiluk merchant was honest, and therefore his claim was valid. But yet it won't make sense to anybody that the law is that he can't have his honey back because he can't prove that it's his honey. Why me and why now? Thought Rabbi Levi Yitzchak to himself. He couldn't bring himself to issue the verdict just yet. The contradiction between the natural sense of what was right and the law of the Torah was too great. Even though the claimant and his defendants anxiously awaited his word, he asked them to excuse himself for a few more minutes. Turning aside to a corner of the room, probably where the bookshelf was, and they might think he was looking at books, but whatever, he poured forth in silent prayer his frustration, beseeching God to enlighten him with understanding. Suddenly, the owner of the honey jumped off his seat as if struck by a bolt of lightning and exclaimed, I remember! I remember! So struck was he by his recollection and so convinced of his importance and relevance, he didn't hesitate to interrupt the Rebbe, who was standing in his corner absorbed in his personal prayer. Honored Rabbi, please forgive me, he called out excitedly. While waiting here, I had the most amazing realization. An old memory which I have not thought about in many years just flashed through my mind. Rescued from oblivion. I'm talking about something that happened 53 years ago, when I was just a boy of 14. Our father died suddenly, leaving us a large inheritance in cash and possessions. Included in this was a storage room filled with casks of wine and oil. One day, the grandfather of these two young men, may he rest in peace, came to our home in Hemelik. He came from Berdichev to Hemelik. He claimed that the wine and oil were his, that he had stored it with our father for safekeeping. My brothers and I were still quite young then, and had never been involved in any of our father's business affairs. We had no idea what we were supposed to do, but we were reluctant to give up the merchandise just like that, just because he said so. We all went to the town rabbi and presented our case. He ruled in our favor, explaining that nothing can be taken from the inheritance of orphans without absolute proof and an oath. The wine and oil remained in our possession. After a good while, we sold the entire lot for a good price. What I just realized is that the money we received for that wine and oil is exactly equal to the value of my honey that I'm claiming, which is now in the possession of the sons of my departed friend. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak's face shone with inner happiness. With his apt comparison of the two parallel events 50 plus years apart, the merchant had conceded his own present case. For the same reason that as an orphan he was entitled to keep the wine and oil that long time ago, more than half a century ago, he had to relinquish his claim on these orphans for his honey today. Now it was all clear to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. Divine Providence had presented him this case so early in his new tenure to teach him an important lesson. Not always is what seems obvious and true to human eyes necessarily the truth, or even fair. Absolute truth resides only with the laws of the Torah. God's ledger is always open, and all accounts are forever being reckoned and balanced. Some may take 50 years for resolution, others less, others more. Consider the story with Shmuel and the king of Agav, where because he wasn't executed, Shaul lost his kingdom, and it was only hundreds of years later that people found out why. He fathered a descendant whose name was Haman. God's ledger is always open, and all accounts are forever being reckoned and balanced. Some may take 50 years for resolution, others more, others less. What is guaranteed is that the Master of the universe constantly oversees to be sure that justice is done. Clearly, there is plenty to be inspired by in this story. Wishing you and yours Shvua Tov, a month of Elul Tov, and a good, sweet year 5786.